On this episode of ResiWeek, getting systems integrators to talk with architects, multi-room HVAC control with an app, and securing the residential network. All that and more. Next on ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 166, recorded Monday, April 8th, 2019. Secure the network.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Atlas IED, innovative audio solutions for every business environment.
This is ResiWeek, your weekly look at the residential AV industry. I am your host, Tim Albright, in for the vacationing Mr. Matt D. Scott, with us to discuss the news that we have gathered this week. First and foremost, his name is Jason Nutt, and he is with CE Pro. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Also with us is Bryce Norstrand. Bryce is from Access Networks. Welcome, sir.
Hello. Good morning.
And last but not least, a first-timer here, so you two be nice to him. His name is Tom Devine from AV Pro. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to start the stories this week. Actually, an event that both Jason and Bryce attended. It was ASEAN's membership meeting in beautiful Florida this past week. ASEAN membership grew 14.63% according to your story, Jason, in 2018. And you guys, the ASEAN specifically is emphasizing the relationships that dealers should have with architects. First, two-part question here, Jason. First, give me an overall sense of the meeting, which you did really well in the story. But secondly, the thinking behind the drive towards architects.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the membership didn't grow by 14%, but the revenues of the members grew.
Right,
by 14.5%.
That was me misreading that.
Yeah, so they have, I believe, 208 members now. So it's, I think, plateaued a little bit, but it's still a significant group from where it was, just started 7 years ago. But overall, the group was very positive. You know, Bryce can chime in here too. Although the conversation was structured into what should we be doing to prepare if the market isn't going to be quite that hockey stick upward element that it has been for the last several years. So everybody was talking about operational efficiency and those sorts of things. And one of the key things was they believe to get these integrators engaged in these projects earlier, then the way to do that is through the architectural community. So they introduced some really very creative potential marketing pieces that could be used to target the architectural community. They are asking kind of the members to pool together, to get very targeted. I mean, these are very expensive pieces. Just as an example, one of them is a video, like a VHS box like we used to rent at Blockbuster. Imagine that, but it's mailed directly to an architect, and then he opens it up, and a video sales letter starts from the dealer, and there's a button on there that they press, and it automatically calls the dealer's number. So very creative, very expensive, obviously. So the dealers would have to have a very targeted and pristine architectural list to send this to, first of all, and then the manufacturers, in order to support it, would have to gauge how they can get ROI on it. But that was just one of the creative ideas they had that I thought was pretty targeted on how they could get to the architectural community.
That's quite unique. Real quickly, a follow up to that, you said that one of the needs that they would have to actually pull this off is a good targeted list for architects. Did ASEAN talk about ways to go about that? I mean, obviously, all four of us on this call have gotten solicitations from various lists. Was there a good, quality way to make sure that you're targeting the right people?
Well, the default is going to be the integrator's own list. So the integrator is going to target the particular architects in his community who he is not doing business with. And of course, when something's super expensive from a direct mail standpoint, you're not going to just willy-nilly send it out to every architect in some database. You're going to have a very targeted list. So The default mechanism there is the dealer's own list, and I think because of the cost, they're going to be very narrow with it.
All right. Bryce, from a manufacturer standpoint, and someone who's a member of ASEAN from the manufacturer side, what was your takeaway from this event?
Well, real quick on the preparation for the economic downturn that people are talking about. We're not hearing that from the dealers. We talked to a lot of the dealers at the event, and they all say the pipeline is full. That there's not. It's good to talk about it. I think it's good to prepare for it, but nobody really knows when it's going to happen, right? Unless there's some major event that causes it. We're not seeing it from housing starts. We're not seeing it from the residential side necessarily, like we did kind of as the precursor in '08, where you started seeing construction slow down. There's still a shortage of homes, so we're not hearing that the pipeline that when we're talking to dealers, they're talking about their pipeline, and it's still very full. I think it's just people are a little bit apprehensive at this point, knowing that we've been on this ride for a while, and there's probably at some point going to be a turn, and that just is what it is. So as far as the architecture side, one of the things that we had a conversation on the manufacturer meeting about, and I don't think any of this is NDA area, was how do you talk to an architect where you gain their interest? Because you could send them a mailer and talk all about the automated home and all the great things that it does, but if it's too technical, it might be over their head. And not saying that architects don't understand a lot of things, but they live in their world and we live in ours. And you can very easily start saying things that just don't make sense because they don't understand what those things are. So the more was about content. How do you, in that marketing material, and reach out to the architect and AIA and the different entities that are there, is making sure that the content's probably more of an educational perspective, something where you're offering more pinpoint type education on a single subject instead of hitting them with 5-6 subjects at one time in a marketing brochure, and having the ability to really kind of hone in on one of those things, whether it be wellness, or whether it be networking, in our world, or understanding video presentation, understanding audio through a home. That was more of the conversation that we had within the manufacturer meeting on the last day of the event.
Is it something that and it's a good point about making sure that you're single subject education, right? Is it something from a marketing standpoint, though, that you would hit them, not every day, let's be honest, none of us want to have marketing piece every day, but you would hit them, in succession, maybe you educate them on, aging in the home, right? And the next time you sent something out, it would be smart home type.
Yeah, you got to have multiple touches. You can't send one thing and think that that's going to get their interest and they're going to call you up and make a deal. I mean, obviously there's the old school lunch and learns, and I think what you're trying to do with that type of marketing material. And there was another example that I'm not going to bring up because I think it's fairly specific to the company that showed it. But it would be a way to touch somebody 7, 8, 9, 10 times. And then that last time you send that piece that Jason was talking about, that video piece that just really kind of reels it all together and gets them to hit the button that says, call the integrator and have that conversation.
All right. Tom, overarching question here, groups like ASEAN, what are the benefits of belonging to them, both from a manufacturer standpoint as well as the dealers?
Well, it definitely puts the power to the people, and that's really nice. Buying groups in general, clearly, you get to work on these big ideas and work with other companies, and then having AV Pro be a part of the groups that we are, it's definitely expanded our business. I think it's really cool, talking beyond that, of putting together the architect and the audio video specialist in the way that they understand that they are putting together this home, but as more and more companies start working as soon as possible on that building process, we're going to be able to put together way better systems. So let's say, these are the initial talks right now, and we're talking about how can we connect to these these architects, which is great. But I'm really excited for a future where we are talking to these architects and they are putting together, IT along with AV, along with everything else, in their pre-builds and their pre-drafts, to see that what kind of rooms and what kind of shortcuts that we can have in the building process to make the installation easier. It's a pretty cool future.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely shameless plug. We actually started an architect show this month in April. The first episode will post the day after this episode of ResiWeek posts.
Very cool.
And here's the thing: this talk of connecting with architects, I've been hearing for over a year now from various dealers. A couple of our manufacturing partners here at AVNation have also been talking about it. So we reached out to a number of architects. There are a couple that have CTSs and CTSDs in house. So that's what we're doing, is we're bringing architects as well as some of those technologists together. The first episode lands this Thursday, so we'll see how that goes as well. So, all right.
It would be interesting to see if some of the architects actually start hiring on AV professionals to be, outside of like a restaurant or something like that, but just a guy who's been in the industry for a long time and comes in and is the internal consultant for those technologies within that company. That would be probably a relatively bold move for some of the architect firms out there.
There's a gentleman by the name of Brad Colt that I met a number of years ago. He works for HGA out of their Minnesota office, and he's worked for them for quite a few years. He is, their AV, they're in-house, and he's actually part of a team. There's 3 or 4 of them that's what they do, right? And so now HGA doesn't do residential necessarily. They're more commercial and larger venues. But I would be interested to reach out and start a conversation with some of the residential architects and see if any of those have started doing the same thing. Yeah. All right. Next story here comes to us from Residential Systems. HyberSense are designers and manufacturers of a quote unquote patent pending smart climate solution that delivers balanced comfort throughout any space. Here's the short version of this. It's a combination of app and devices that lets you get multi HVAC unit comfort in each room with one unit. And as somebody who, I live with, 3 other people, my wife and 2 kids, and all of us have different temperaments and want different temperatures. I'm certain that all of our offices have the exact same thing. This is an interesting and unique solution. Bryce, from your standpoint, does this thing have legs to go anywhere as far as both residential and maybe even like commercial?
Well, I deal with the same issue you do. I work from home most of the time. My wife sits in the same office as me, and we're basically yelling at each other all day long about how hot or how cold it is. So if I had a room in the house where I could say this is Bryce's room and it's 65 degrees in there and it keeps me awake, and she can have one in the house that's 75, I'm kind of wondering how that system works off of a single HVAC unit. And then you start running into the next question I would have would be, how does it work in homes that have 2 units? How does it work in homes that have 3 units? You have upstairs, downstairs. Do those systems collide with each other? I think it's how do you sell a lot of things? You market to the common man, right? You market it to the middle of the group. And most people have one HVAC system in their house. And I think it's got a lot of legs for that scenario where you've got, either a room that's always too hot or a room that's always too cold, and you can try and equalize that out. It'll be interesting to see, the performance side of it. If the HVAC system actually runs more because it's trying to make up for the deficit in one room and closing the vents down in another, that would be interesting to see if it actually runs more often than it would if it was just doing its thing based on one thermostat location.
Yeah,
so I think it has legs. I think it's very interesting. I looked at the website. I'm interested in it to see how it performs or what the caveats are when using a system like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, I got a question from your standpoint, whether it's you at your home or talking to your dealers. Is this something that has a potential?
Well, I would say yes, for sure. Right? It's the answer to the question that every employee has ever complained about in an office, and every person that has ever lived, like you said, with multiple people. But is it too good to be true, right? Is this thing going to be work as well as we would want it to? Or like Bryce said, are your units going to be running all the time now because you're concentrating on 1 or 2 rooms above other rooms? But if it is just like what I have learned through that article and checking out their website, this is like a dream come true, right? It just seems like I definitely would want to be in an environment and see this sucker work, because this is, if it works like it says it works, then I think this thing has beyond legs. I mean, these guys are going to be very, very successful, and we'll see a lot of companies coming out with trying to be copycats of this if this is the way. Like Bryce said, a single unit system, that is the market to go after, right? Because millions and millions and millions of homes have a single unit system. And if you're successful there, I'm sure that they would have the capital to go after software engineers to work with a 2P system or 2 or 3 unit system for different levels, and expand all the way up to commercial units or whatever else. I would definitely say it has legs, and I think it's a great idea. I think it's a solution for a problem that people have had since the beginning of air conditioning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tim, there was a previous company called EcoVent that was out probably 2 years ago with a similar concept, and I know Bob Fields, who's working with HyberSense, actually worked with EcoVent also, and I think they've learned the lessons that EcoVent made in terms of their channel strategy was a lot of the failings as to why that company, which was venture capital funded, didn't make it. So I'm also optimistic about this. I live in a house that's built in 1875, where if the thermostat says it's 70, the only place it's 70 is standing right in front of that thermostat. I can tell you.
Well, wellness is a huge topic right now across the industry, across our industry. Wellness is something that lighting control and being able to control the light temperature and what type of light you are exposed to throughout the day, and HVAC is a big air conditioning, heating. It's a big portion of that. Staying comfortable and not having wild temperature swings can have a lot to do with wellness as well. So I think it's a great topic. It's the more and more we're connected to devices and sitting in front of computers all day in our homes, the more comfortable the climate has to be able to not be in a place of stress when you're working from home or when you're sitting in front of a computer. So it's an interesting topic. I'm interested to see where it goes.
I think the new term in the building community, where it was just green homes, is now, to Bryce's point, healthy home is now the new term that the building community is using. So you're right.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, last story here comes to us from ResTech today, talking about, honestly, network security, cyber hacks, and the liability that some dealers may face when it comes to putting these things in. The gentleman that wrote this, Jay Basin, writes about 2 or 3 overarching themes, but I want to hit on 2, and Tom, we'll start with you on this. One is about the dying or the less market saturation of smart hubs. And one of the things he points out here is the devices like Z-Wave and Zigbee have an advantage that they aren't exposed to the homeowner's network because they are behind the smart hub, and getting rid of those smart hubs actually would be a detriment to the safety and the security of the network itself. Then he goes into the liability, and this is something that we've talked about on AVWeek. We've talked about on several of our podcasts, and really smart people have delved into this, people that have looked at this both from a legal standpoint as well as the integration standpoint. Where does the system integrator stand when it comes to making sure that what they put in is as network secure as possible?
Well, I would say it is of the utmost importance, right? The homeowner is coming in as a layman. They're buying a service that and they're buying they are buying a full service, right? They're not just buying the products, they're not just buying the installation. And so, I think it is on an integrator to at least take the steps that he is able to take to ensure that the system is safe. There is going to be, as everything is now connected, and we're getting more and more connectivity throughout all of our products, between, like we just talked about with HVAC and, having the architect put together a system with AV in mind, and you put all this together, well, then in turn it comes together as a whole system, and the AV system needs to be just as secure as the IT system is just as secure as anything that's coming together. When you're blending all those together into one system, then I think that, it is on the integrator to ensure that it is secure, but also, the integrator has to continue to do installations, and it's not like we can not try to connect these products because we're afraid of security risks. the work has to continue, and I think the integrator just has to take all the steps they are able to take, and they should be covered.
All right. Mr. Knott, you've covered this a lot as well over the last few years. Where do you come down, and what have you discovered in your reporting?
Well, the two things I'll point to from the liability standpoint is one, and again, Bryce is the expert in terms of talking about network stuff here, so we want to get to him as quick as possible. But the CTA cybersecurity checklist that CTA created, which is a 17-point checklist that integrators and their technicians should use, and not only use to guide their technicians through protecting the home as much as they possibly can from cyber hacks, but also it's a sales tool to show the customer, hey, here are the 17 things we are taking, the 17 steps that we as an integrator are taking to secure your network. And the odds are that most other integrators who are coming to the project are not doing that. Second, I'm not sure where the limitation of liability clause that integrators have in their contracts protects them, but we all know where it stands on the security industry, that there is a limitation of liability clause in a security contract that limits the amount of liability that the integrator has for fire damage, theft, burglary, all these dastardly things that can happen around a security system. So every integrator should have a limitation of liability clause in his contract when he's presenting to a homeowner, and I'm assuming that is going to carry over to their network security also. But again, I want to hear what Bryce has to say on this.
So this is a much bigger topic than just cybersecurity for us. I agree with a lot of these things as far as having a limit of liability and having a place where you can go to the client and say, you sign this and you understand that all of these things I'm not responsible for any longer. Obviously, you don't want to say a bunch of things that aren't true, like you should be responsible for. But when we look at this from our point of view, you start talking about managed service providers, and the cybersecurity is a portion of being a managed service provider. There is other things that go along with that, whether it be maintenance, monitoring, service calls, all these things that could be included in that managed services program. And really what it comes down to when you start introducing a system like that or a solution like that to a client and trying to get them to sign the dotted line on what you aren't liable for, but also what you do want to continue to take care of for them, is documentation. And that documentation is extremely crucial. It has to be done by state and sometimes even city. So if you're working in a specific area, the laws in California where I live are totally different than they are in other states. We are held to probably a different standard than somebody in, say, Nebraska or Texas. And it's because of the climate in the state, right? So you have to be able to have that documentation prepared and make sure that you're constantly following up on what that documentation is. The problem with a lot of integration companies is they're not big enough to go get that done. So you've got to get some other entities involved. CTA is a good one. HTA is a good one. CDIA is a good one. The buying groups are good. All of these organizations that have a lot more financial power to get these kind of documents completed. And if you look at the alarm industry, that's something they're very good at. They're very good at creating documentation that protects the alarm security professional. That's something that they've done for years and years and years and years. And it's not one guy sitting at home typing out a contract and then handing it to his lawyer and saying, hey, look this over. There's a whole group of these people that have, the entities behind them that create that documentation that help them across all 50 states. And without something like that, it's going to be very difficult to create a system within the integration organization that actually has that same kind of clout. And where that comes, what that also does is start to create legitimization of the industry. So now you've got all this documentation, you've got all these things that go hand in hand, and you can present that to the homeowner, and they look at all that and they say, okay, wow, these guys really have their stuff together. And they're hearing it from everybody they talk to. If they hear it from every integration company that they interview, that they talk to about a project, and then they don't hear it from one guy, okay, that's the guy you're not going to do business with. Yeah. So it legitimizes things across the board. On the cybersecurity side, you've got to have a human error clause. You've got to have a way out if the homeowner clicks on something. You can't stop somebody who gives somebody access to their home. Like if I have all the cybersecurity in the world and I allow somebody into my house with a laptop and they plug into a switch, I mean, there's levels of security that you can get to that you would protect yourself from that. But if that happens in a home, we've created enough convenience where that's probably not going to get blocked. They're going to have access to everything in that house or in that particular VLAN if they're connected on a certain port. So you have to have documentation that shows that you care about them, but that you have to have a way out. You have to be able to say this. If this happens, if you click on an email, a phishing email, and you send a guy in whatever country overseas $1 million from your bank account because you thought it was your CFO at your company, that's not on me, the integrator. I'm not responsible for that $1 million.
Yeah.
So it's a huge topic, and it's something that we need. It needs to be bigger than just one or two integration companies. It needs to be a problem solved by the entities within the industry.
Well, it goes back to you mentioned alarm companies earlier. You can have 15 locks on your front door, but if you give somebody the key to that lock, then the lock company is not responsible because you gave them the keys. Bryce, real quickly as we wrap up here, is this something then? First of all, do you guys have Access Networks? Do you have a baseline? I understand that you guys have got offices in California, but also in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a baseline that you give your customers and your dealers? Say, look, here's some best practices. This is probably your bare minimum, and then layer on top of that your local, state, city requirements, or is it something where you're just talking to them on an individual basis?
No, it's individual basis at this point. It's something that we've been investing in time and effort and money into with a particular law firm that is nationwide. So the fact that we have a law firm that's nationwide, that we can have them review documents. It's not something that we give somebody at this point in time, that we give them a baseline document that allows them to go out and do this. We inform them through our dealer agreement and through other means that they need to work on getting these things done within their local laws and have the documentation. And there's some integrators that have a fairly good limited release of liability that kind of protects them from anything that happens outside of their control, and sometimes that will help. But if you're out, so right now we've introduced 24/7, 365 updates on firewall security with our newer systems, and it opens up a whole other thing. Like, we're saying we're doing this, now we have to be able to back that up, and there's the manufacturer of that firewall has documentation that we can provide to the dealer so that they can take that. But it's not anything that's like a sign on the dotted line. That's something that they need to wrap into. Integration companies need to wrap into the rest of their systems and their processes. It's a very big topic. It's something that that us, Access Networks as a company is fairly passionate about making sure that guys are securing their clients properly. But there's also just as an example, you could secure the crap out of the house from a cyber threat perspective, and then the client calls you and says, I can't do this. And well, you could say, well, we have tight security, that's why you can't do that, it's inconvenient. And homeowners, I want that turned off. Okay, you turn that off, and then the next day they're like, hey, I got hacked. It could be that kind of scenario. So it's a very big topic, and we're talking to a lot of people right now about it and trying to figure out what the best path forward is. But it's not going to be one integration company that figures it out. It's going to have to be a community that figures it out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for joining us. Mr. Jason Knott from CE Pro, where do people find you or CE Pro?
Obviously, they can go to cepro.com, and they can follow me on Twitter at JasonWKnott.
All right, very good. Mr. Bryce, thank you, sir, as always. How do people find you or Access Networks?
Just go to accessca.com and click on the contact sales link, and you'll get me or one of my cohorts.
All right, very good. And Mr. Tom Devine, thank you, sir, for joining us. Where do people find you or AV Pro Edge?
Well, thanks for having me, Tim, and you can find me at avproedge.com. You can contact there, or AV Pro Edge on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything.
All right, very good. My name is Tim Albright. I don't look like, nor do I sound like Matt Scott. He is the normal host of this because he's the residential systems integrator. But for AVNation, you can go by the website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others. I mentioned the new architect show that we have coming down the way actually this Thursday. We also have 2 other brand new ones. One's dealing with digital signage, Digital Signage Digest, hosted by Lenore Elaine, and another one as we talk to CEOs and executives and how they get stuff done. So check all that out and more at avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for ResiWeek.